I never thought I'd walk away from a man worth billions. But money can't buy what we truly need. I was the woman who taught Elijah Stone that his empire meant nothing without someone to share it with. By the time he realized it, I was already gone. I'm Amara Johnson, not the woman I was 5 years ago, but someone shaped by loving and leaving one of the richest men in America. My story isn't about wealth or luxury, though I tasted both. It's about what happens when a man who can buy anything finally discovers the one thing his money can't touch. I grew up in my grandmother's weathered Victorian in New Orleans, where the air hung heavy with jasmine and stories of ancestors who survived against all odds. My bedroom doubled as my studio, paint splatters marking the wooden floor like memories. Grandma worked double shifts as a nurse to put food on our table while raising me after Mum passed. Create beauty where you find none, she'd tell me, watching me transform discarded materials into art. Those early years taught me value doesn't come from price tags, but from meaning and sacrifice. By 26, I was living in a cramped apartment in the city, teaching art to elementary kids by day and creating my own pieces by night. My paintings, bold, unapologetic explorations of Black womanhood, were starting to get noticed in small galleries. Not enough to quit my day job, but enough to dream. Then came the charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. My roommate Keisha worked for the catering company and got me in as a server when someone called out sick. Rich people, free food, and networking, she said. Triple win. I was pouring champagne when he approached, not for a drink, but because he'd stopped in front of me, studying my face with an intensity that made me nervous. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his voice warm, amused. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, then realized I probably shouldn't admit that to a guest. That was my first encounter with Elijah Stone, not the tech billionaire from magazine covers, but a tall man with thoughtful eyes who asked about the paint beneath my fingernails instead of trying to impress me with his portfolio. When my shift ended, I found him waiting, wondering if I'd show him my favorite piece in the museum. "Not a date," he insisted, "just curiosity." One conversation became dinner, became walks through art districts, discussing everything from my grandmother's gumbo recipe to his childhood building computers in his parents' garage. Our worlds couldn't have been more different, his sleek penthouse overlooking the city, my shabby apartment with thrift store furniture, but something clicked between us that defied explanation. "You see me," he told me once, "not the bank account or the company, just me." And I did. Beneath the tailored suits and business acumen was a man who remembered feeling invisible, who built an empire, partly so the world couldn't ignore him anymore. But I wasn't naive. "I've seen what happens when regular girls fall for extraordinary bank accounts," I told Keisha, who rolled her eyes at my hesitation. "They lose themselves." Every time his driver dropped me at my apartment, the contrast between our lives screamed warning. Every invitation to another gala or business dinner felt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't rehearsed for. Yet every time I pulled back, he found ways to meet me where I was, showing up at my community art class in jeans, asking questions about technique like any other student. The man could buy anything, but somehow, what he wanted most was me, paint-stained hands and all. Dating Elijah was like being caught in a beautiful storm. One minute I was teaching kids how to mix primary colors. The next I was stepping off his private jet in Paris because he thought I might find inspiration there. The transition wasn't seamless. I still remember the first formal dinner where I used the wrong fork and felt every judgment-laden glance from his business associates. But Elijah just winked at me across the table and deliberately used the wrong fork too. Those early months were intoxicating. He'd surprise me after work, whisk me away to seaside restaurants where chefs prepared meals just for us. When I worried about my students, he arranged for a renowned artist to cover my classes. "Your art needs room to breathe," he'd say. And he was right. With his encouragement and connections, My work began appearing in galleries I'd only dreamed of. Critics used words like powerful and authentic. For the first time, I could afford to create without worrying about rent. Elijah seemed genuinely proud, standing quietly at my first solo showing, watching collectors fight over my pieces. "I told you," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "They see what I saw that first night." When a major gallery offered representation, he bought me a small studio space as a celebration gift. The first time, I didn't immediately protest his generosity. Life expanded in ways I never imagined. Breakfast in New York, dinner in London. Museum directors who once wouldn't return my calls invited me to exclusive events. My grandmother, visiting his penthouse for the first time, pulled me aside. "Child, this man looks at you like you're his personal sunrise," she said, though I caught her eyeing the absurd crystal chandelier with suspicion. But paradise has shadows. The first time Elijah cancelled our weekend in Martha's Vineyard for an emergency board meeting, I understood. The fifth time, something shifted. His phone became a third presence in our relationship, constantly demanding attention. Just one call, he'd promise, disappearing for hours. I'd fall asleep alone, waking to find him still hunched over spreadsheets in his home office. Stock markets from Tokyo to London reflected in his glasses. When we visited my family in New Orleans, his attention fractured. My cousin's jokes sailed past him while he typed rapid-fire emails. During my grandmother's 75th birthday dinner, which he'd generously catered, 3 different assistants called with urgent matters. Later, washing dishes side by side, Grandma studied me carefully. "That man's heart is divided," she said softly. "Money's a jealous mistress, Amara." I defended him fiercely. His company employs thousands. People depend on him. "And what about you, child? What do you need that his money can't buy?" The question lingered like smoke. Meanwhile, my career flourished under the spotlight association with Elijah brought. Prestigious commissions, museum acquisitions, features in art magazines. We moved into a sprawling loft with the studio space most artists would kill for. I had everything I'd ever wanted professionally. But some nights, lying beside Elijah's sleeping form, I'd remember painting cross-legged on my grandmother's porch, broke but unencumbered. Success brought its own expectations, its own weight, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space between Elijah and me widened, filled with unspoken frustrations and the incessant ping of notifications that always took precedence over uninterrupted time together. I remember the exact moment everything changed. We were in Santorini, supposedly celebrating our 2nd anniversary. The Mediterranean stretched before us, impossibly blue against whitewashed buildings. I'd been sketching the coastline while Elijah took a quick call that had lasted 90 minutes. When he finally returned to our balcony, his face had that tightness I'd come to recognize. "The Singapore deal is collapsing," he said, already packing his laptop. "I need to get back." I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing months ago. Instead, I flew back with him, watched him disappear into his office for 3 days straight, emerging only for coffee and brief, distracted conversations where his mind remained elsewhere. The global markets were entering free fall. Headlines screamed about the worst crash since 2008, and Elijah's tech empire sat precariously at the center of it. Companies he'd acquired were hemorrhaging value. Investors panicked. His phone rang constantly, with calls from board members, partners, and anxious executives. Our bedroom transformed into a secondary command center, with multiple screens monitoring stock tickers around the clock. I tried to be supportive, brought him food he barely touched, listened to technical explanations about market liquidity that I pretended to understand, told him we'd weather this together. But the truth was, I felt myself fading in his world, becoming transparent, a ghost wandering through our home while he fought invisible battles in virtual boardrooms. "It's just temporary," became his mantra. "Once we stabilize things." But weeks turned to months, My own career continued ascending. Ironically, my series exploring isolation and disconnection within relationships was resonating powerfully with collectors. I poured my frustration into canvas after canvas, each one a conversation I couldn't seem to have with the man I loved. Then came my breakthrough. The Hoffman Gallery, yes, that Hoffman Gallery, wanted to feature my work in their main exhibition space. The curator called it a raw exploration of contemporary intimacy. Opening night would feature critics from every major art publication. This was the moment I'd worked toward my entire life. "You'll be there, right?" I asked Elijah, trying to keep the desperation from my voice as he typed emails at our kitchen island. "I need you there." He looked up, briefly present. "Wouldn't miss it for anything," he promised, squeezing my hand before returning to his screen. I spent weeks preparing, selecting pieces, agonizing over placement. The centerpiece was a large-scale portrait, abstract but unmistakably Elijah, composed of thousands of tiny timepieces, all showing different hours. I titled it "The Man Who Owned Time But Never Had Any." Opening night arrived. The gallery buzzed with Manhattan's elite. Critics praised the emotion and technique. Collectors placed red dots beside nearly every piece within the first hour. It was everything I'd dreamed of, except for the conspicuous absence of the one person I wanted to share it with. 3 hours in, my phone vibrated. A text. "Markets in freefall. Emergency board meeting. Can't make it. So proud of you. Order whatever champagne you want. Tell them it's on me." Something broke inside me then. Standing amid success, surrounded by people praising work they couldn't possibly understand, was about the man who wasn't there. I realized a fundamental truth. I would always rank below his empire. In his hierarchy of needs, I was luxury, not necessity. I left the gallery alone that night, tears mixing with rain as my taxi navigated Manhattan streets. The driver asked if I was okay. "I just sold every painting for more money than my grandmother made in her lifetime," I told him, "and I've never felt more worthless." When Elijah came home the next morning, I was sitting on our balcony watching the sunrise. He looked exhausted, apologetic, bearing an extravagant jewelry box that I didn't open. "I can explain," he started. "You already have," I replied quietly. "For months." I left while Elijah was in Singapore, negotiating with investors. Not out of spite, but because I knew if I saw his face, I might weaken. My decision deserved better than that. I packed only what was truly mine: clothes, art supplies, personal mementos, the designer wardrobe, the jewelry, the gifts that had once seemed like expressions of love, but now felt like compensation for absence, all stayed behind. The only thing I left for him was a painting, not the one from the gallery exhibition, but something new I'd created in the quiet hours of certainty after my decision was made. 2 silhouettes facing away from each other, connected by a thread of gold that frayed in the middle. I titled it simply, "Worth." I rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the luxury I'd grown accustomed to. The first night, sitting on a mattress on the floor with takeout containers as my only furniture, I cried until my body ached. Not for the penthouse or the lifestyle, but for the man I'd loved and the relationship that prosperity had somehow impoverished. Elijah's reaction came in waves. First, confusion, texts asking where I was, why I'd left, then determination, flowers, jewelry, even a car delivered to my new address. Finally, personal visits where he'd stand in my tiny living room, looking simultaneously powerful and lost. "I can change," he'd promise. "Just need to stabilize the company first." That was the problem. There would always be something to stabilize, acquire, or expand. His empire wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. Meanwhile, I channeled my heartbreak into a new collection. The Economics of Absence, critics called it my most powerful work yet. The irony wasn't lost on me. My artistic voice had found its clearest expression through losing the man who helped amplify it. 2 years passed. My work hung in museums. I bought my grandmother a house with a proper studio where I could visit and paint. I dated occasionally, though no one seriously. And somewhere across the city, according to business magazines, Elijah Stone rebuilt his financial empire, more successful than ever. We ran into each other eventually. A charity auction where one of my pieces was being sold. He looked older, his eyes carrying a weight they hadn't before. Success had polished him further, but taken something essential too. "You look happy," he said simply. "I am," I replied, surprised to find it was true. For a moment we stood in silence, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, yet somehow alone in our shared history. "I missed the most important things," he finally said, "trying to keep everything else." I touched his arm gently. Some lessons cost more than others. He nodded, eyes holding mine with perfect presence, the kind I'd once desperately wanted when it mattered. Too late, but not without value. We both knew some chapters can't be rewritten, no matter how wealthy or powerful you become. Some opportunities, once missed, don't return for second chances. And some wealth, once you understand its real nature, can never be measured in dollars. I sometimes wonder if Elijah thinks about me when he sits alone in that penthouse, surrounded by everything money can buy. They say billionaires don't have regrets, just investments that didn't yield expected returns. But I saw the truth in his eyes that night. Some currencies can't be traded back once spent. Time, presence, love. What are you investing in today? Who's waiting while you chase something that can't love you back? Don't wait until you're standing alone in your empire of accomplishments, realizing the throne beside you has been empty for years. Subscribe now for more stories that might just save what money can't replace before it's too late.